You close your eyes, and within minutes, your brain starts lying to you. It builds entire worlds out of nothing, puts people in your life who don't exist, makes you run from things that aren't there. And when you wake up, it's gone, like it never happened. We've been asking the same question for literally thousands of years. Why do we dream? And here's the thing nobody tells you. A Mesopotamian priest with a clay tablet 4,000 years ago, and a neuroscientist with an fMRI machine today, would actually agree on the answer. Not completely, but more than you'd think. Let's get into it. Section 1. The dream industry. Here's something that gets left out of every dream documentary. Ancient people didn't just believe dreams were messages from gods and leave it at that. They built an entire professional system around it. In Mesopotamia, one of the oldest civilizations on Earth, dream interpretation wasn't a casual thing. It was a job, a serious, respected, paid job. They had reference manuals, actual written guides with hundreds of dream scenarios cross-referenced with predicted outcomes. The biggest one was called the Ishkar-Zakak, found on clay tablets in the library of King Ashurbanipal in Nineveh. Think of it less like a mystical scroll and more like a diagnostic manual. If you dreamed of a falling tooth, here's what it means. If a dead relative appeared, here's what's coming. And if the outcome was bad, here's the ritual to cancel it. But here's the detail that almost nobody talks about. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest stories ever written, there's a line that says Gilgamesh did not lie down to sleep, but to dream. Not to sleep, to dream. These people weren't just passively waiting for dreams to happen. They were deliberately trying to summon them, like it was a skill you could practice. The Egyptians took this even further. They had a ritual called dream incubation. People would travel, sometimes for weeks, to sleep inside specific temples dedicated to specific gods. The whole point was to trigger a meaningful dream in a sacred location. But here's the part that sounds almost too wild to be real. When a dream came back too vague to understand, the person would bring it to a professional oracle, and that oracle would go to sleep and have a dream about their dream, a two-layer dream support system. In 1500 BCE, dream interpretation wasn't superstition, it was an industry. Section 2. The Forgotten Researcher. Most people have heard of Freud. His 1899 book, The Interpretation of Dreams, is basically considered the starting point of modern dream science. Almost nobody's heard of the guy who did it 1800 years earlier, with actual fieldwork. His name was Artemidorus. He lived in Greece in the 2nd century AD, and he spent years traveling across Greece, Italy, and Asia collecting dreams from real people, not from gods, not from priests, from regular people. He collected roughly 3,000 dreams. Then he analyzed them, looked for patterns, compared outcomes, and then he wrote a 5-volume book called the Oneirocritica, basically the world's first large-scale study of dream content. That's not spiritual practice, that's primitive data science. And his method was surprisingly modern. He said dream interpretation was, quote, nothing else but the juxtaposition of similarities, meaning your brain doesn't show you literal information, it shows you metaphors. And the job of the interpreter is to pattern match those metaphors back to reality. That's almost exactly how modern neuroscientists describe dream symbolism. Same idea, 1800 years apart. Completely different vocabulary. And there's one more thing about the ancient Egyptians worth knowing. Their dream priests discovered something specific. If a sick person dreamed of dying, it meant recovery. The dream meant the literal opposite of what it showed. They called it reversal, and they built it into their interpretation system. Centuries later, Freud described almost the exact same mechanism and presented it as a new discovery. It wasn't new, it was a rebrand. Section 3. The Dream Ban. Okay there. Here's a quick one that almost nobody knows. Dream divination, The practice of making decisions based on dreams wasn't just popular in the ancient Arabian world before Islam. It was so deeply woven into daily life that when Muhammad established Islam, he formally prohibited the practice, not discouraged it, banned it. That tells you something about how powerful it was. Most cultural practices just fade out over time. This one was significant enough that a major religious founder had to write a rule against it. That's how much dreams controlled people's choices. Transition. Okay, so we've covered 3,000 years of humans building serious systems around dreams. Now here's where it gets genuinely strange. Modern neuroscience isn't as far from the gods are warning you as you'd think. It just swapped gods for evolution. Section 4. Your brain is rehearsing danger. There's a real theory in cognitive science called threat simulation theory. It was developed by a Finnish neuroscientist named Antti Revonsuo. And the argument is this: dreaming didn't evolve randomly. It evolved specifically to simulate threatening situations, not as a glitch, as a feature. The idea is your brain is running you through danger scenarios while you sleep. Predators, conflict, accidents, loss. So that your threat response system stays sharp without you actually needing to almost die to practice it. It's a flight simulator for survival, running every night, while you think you're just asleep. And the evidence for this is pretty striking. Studies on traumatized children found they simulate threatening events in their dreams far more frequently than children with calm lives. Exactly what you'd expect if the dream system is calibrated to whatever danger level your real life contains. More threats in real life, more threat rehearsal at night. And here's the flip side that really makes you think. When REM sleep is disrupted, when the dreaming phase is cut short, people's real-world threat avoidance gets measurably worse. You interrupt the rehearsal, and the actual skill degrades. Now there's a second theory that's even newer and stranger. Some researchers now think dreams solve what they call an overfitting problem. Here's what that means. Every day, your brain learns from the specific situations it encounters. But if it only ever learns from those specific situations, it gets too specialized. It starts expecting tomorrow to look exactly like today. And when it doesn't, it fails. Dreams, in this theory, are your brain deliberately corrupting its own data overnight, injecting weird scenarios, randomizing the inputs, forcing itself to stay flexible. The bizarre, nonsensical quality of dreams, the reason your dead aunt is suddenly a bus driver in a purple city, might not be a malfunction. It might be the entire point. Section 5. The monster isn't real. Okay, this one explains something almost everyone has experienced, and almost nobody has had properly explained. You're in a nightmare. There's a presence in the room. You can feel it, but you cannot move. Your body is completely frozen. You try to scream, nothing comes out. That's sleep paralysis. And for most of human history, people interpreted it as supernatural. A demon, a ghost, a spirit sitting on your chest. Modern neuroscience finally has a real explanation, and it's almost more unsettling. During REM sleep, your brain sends a signal that temporarily paralyzes your muscles. This is actually normal and protective. It stops you from physically acting out your dreams. But sometimes, a person starts waking up before that paralysis has lifted. Your conscious mind switches on, but your body is still locked. And your brain, which is designed to explain everything, suddenly has a problem it can't solve. Why can't I move? Recent research traces what happens next to a region called the posterior insula. A prediction error fires. Your brain has no logical answer for the paralysis, so it invents one. There's someone in the room. There's a figure at the foot of the bed. There's a weight on your chest. The fear doesn't cause the paralysis. The paralysis comes first, completely mechanically. And then your brain builds a monster afterward to explain what it can't understand. The demon was never there. Your brain created it to fill the gap. Section 6. Not everyone dreams the same way. Here's one that should completely change how you think about dreaming. Most people assume that dreams are fundamentally visual experiences, images, scenes, faces. But people who were born blind don't have visual dreams. They dream in sound, in texture, in spatial movement, in temperature and emotion. No pictures at all. And that tells you something important. Dreams aren't about images. They're about whatever sensory and predictive systems your brain has available, repurposed during sleep. The visuals most of us experience aren't the essential ingredient. They're just what happens to be available in a sighted brain. Which means when ancient people across completely different cultures, the Mesopotamians, the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Indians, all independently decided that dreams carried real information. They weren't wrong about that part. The information was just about their own internal systems, not the gods, but still real. So here's where all of this leaves us. A Mesopotamian priest with a clay tablet manual, a Greek researcher with 3,000 collected dreams, a modern neuroscientist with a brain scanner, all of them in completely different languages describing the same underlying behavior. Your brain refuses to stay idle at night. It runs simulations. It rehearses danger. It corrupts its own data to stay flexible. It builds monsters to explain what it can't understand. And somehow, across thousands of years, different cultures all noticed this happening and built entire systems to make sense of it. Maybe dreams aren't random noise. Maybe they never were. Maybe every civilization that ever looked up at the ceiling in the dark and wondered what was happening inside their own head was already asking exactly the right question. They just didn't have the vocabulary yet.